Welcome to The Knowledge Room, your go-to space podcast for smart insights, global trends, and deep dives into migration, work, and opportunity with a Nordic lens. I'm your host, Ryle, and every episode, we explore what's changing, what it means, and how you can stay ahead. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit the plus button or follow wherever you're listening so you never miss an update from The Knowledge Room. Now, let's get started.
Welcome to a new deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a topic that really sparks a lot of debate. It's often surrounded by some pretty strong opinions. We're talking about the economic impact of immigration, and specifically, we're looking at Sweden. We've got this government commission report that seems to flip a common narrative right on its head. Yeah, it's a detailed study from Sweden's National Institute of Economic Research. You might know it as NIER. And honestly, it offers some genuinely surprising data. It suggests that, on average, immigrants actually contribute more to the Swedish economy than native-born Swedes, which is, well, that's quite a claim, isn't it? So if you've ever wondered about the real numbers behind the headlines, maybe felt a bit confused by conflicting stories, this deep dive is definitely for you. Our mission today, unpack this report, try to understand its nuances, and figure out what it truly means for how we think about immigration and economics. Okay. Let's dive in. Right. So to start, why is this report so significant? What was the thinking behind the Swedish government asking NI to measure this cost or benefit back in 2023?
Well, what's fascinating here is just how deliberate and comprehensive the approach was. The government specifically asked for a breakdown, by immigrant group and by country of origin. So the report meticulously compared tax contributions from both labor migrants and refugees against the public expenses they actually used. Things like healthcare, schooling, pensions, the lot. It's a very, very direct way to try and assess economic impact using the latest full year data they had, which is from 2022. They really wanted, it seems, to get right down to the actual figures.
Okay, so they set out to get the figures. And when they crunched those numbers, what was the first big reveal, the aggregate picture?
Well, the aggregate numbers are absolutely striking, yeah. The report showed that people born outside Sweden, so the immigrant population as a whole, contributed a net positive of plus 6 billion SEK Swedish krona. Now, to put that in perspective, that's roughly 0.1% of Sweden's GDP.
Wow, okay, a net positive of 6 billion. And what about the other side? People born in Sweden?
Yeah, the flip side. People born in Sweden, that group had a net negative contribution of minus 6 billion SEK. Now, here's where it gets really interesting and fundamentally challenges those common assumptions. On a per-person average, foreign-born individuals contributed a net positive of plus 2,700 SEK, while Swedish-born individuals had a net negative of negative 700 SEK per person.
Per person. Minus 700 for Swedish-born, plus 2,700 for foreign-born.
Exactly. I mean, this isn't just some statistical quirk. It really forces you to confront this idea that in Sweden, based on this data, it's actually the foreign-born population in aggregate that's kind of shoring up the public services, the schools, the healthcare, pensions that everyone relies on. That's a bit of a paradigm shift for many people, I think.
It absolutely is. And I can imagine listeners thinking, okay, but how can that be? What about, the costs we often hear about?
Yeah.
Especially with integration. Is that where breaking it down into different groups becomes so crucial? Because immigrant isn't just one single category, right?
That's exactly the point. It's such a crucial distinction. It's easy, isn't it, to paint all immigrants with the same brush. But this report, it meticulously pulls back the curtain, shows us the incredible diversity within that term. And yeah, when they started breaking down the groups, the economic impacts look very different.
Okay, so let's get into that breakdown. What's the first key segment the report highlights once you start disaggregating that data?
So the report first identifies what it calls other immigrants.
Right.
Now, this is a broad group, right? It includes labor migrants, students, people who arrive through family reunification. And this group showed a substantial net positive contribution. We're talking plus 28 billion SEK, which averages out to impressive plus 19,800 SEK per person. So this group clearly demonstrates a really strong economic benefit.
28 billion positive. That's a powerful number. But, for those maybe skeptical, they might immediately ask, okay, but what about the costs, the integration challenges, or groups sometimes cited as a drain? Does the report actually dig into that side too?
Oh, absolutely. It doesn't shy away from that. So then we have the refugee group. The report found this group had a net contribution of negative 22 billion SEK. Negative 22 billion. However, and this is really important, you have to look at the wide variation within this group, which the report does highlight. For example, get this. The top 10% of working-age refugees contributed a significant plus 500,000 SEK per person, positive 500,000 each, while the bottom 10% had a negative contribution of negative 300,000 SEK per person.
Wow, that's a huge range within just the refugee category.
It really is, and it illustrates that, time in Sweden truly matters. It often takes years for newcomers, particularly refugees fleeing difficult circumstances, to fully enter the labor market, learn the language, and eventually become net taxpayers. It's kind of like an investment, isn't it? One that yields returns over time.
That deeper dive into the refugee group, the variation there is really, really important context. But the report goes even further, doesn't it? It also breaks things down by country of origin, which must add another fascinating layer. What did that show?
It did indeed. And yeah, the country of origin breakdown is quite revealing. The top contributor country, India. There are about 56,000 Indians in Sweden, and collectively they contributed a net positive of plus 6.6 billion SEK, which is an incredible plus 119,000 SEK per person on average.
Per person. Plus 119,000 from Indian immigrants.
Yeah. And other high contribution groups included people from the US, UK, Canada, Australia, Iran, Chile, China, and Thailand. It really highlights the impact of, skilled labor migration, maybe entrepreneurship as well.
Okay. And on the flip side, which groups did the report identify as having higher costs? And crucially, what were the reasons given?
Right. Conversely, the report identified groups with higher net costs. This was primarily due to factors like, age structure or perhaps more extensive service needs initially. These included populations from Finland, Syria, Somalia, and Eritrea. But take Finland, for example. It's an interesting case. Many Finns immigrated to Sweden way back between 1950 and 1970. So naturally, many of them are now older. They're drawing pensions. And that reflects as a cost in this kind of economic snapshot model. It really brings up that important point about the life cycle of immigration, doesn't it? Economic impact isn't static. It changes over decades.
That makes perfect sense. It's a snapshot in time. Okay, so given these really revealing numbers, these nuances, it feels like this report could have, maybe should have, fundamentally shifted the public conversation in Sweden. So what was the reaction? Because this is where the narrative around data can get really tricky, can it?
It truly is. And what happened next is, quite telling. It was widely reported and observed by many commentators that the government, when they held their press conference, they primarily highlighted only the refugee costs, the negative 22 billion figure, which, as we've just discussed, is only one part of the story, and it's a part that evolves significantly over time.
Right. So critics presumably jumped on that, pointing out that this framing ignored the huge positive from labor migrants and also overlooked that point about refugees becoming contributors later on.
Exactly. Critics were very quick to point that out. There's a union think tank called Kettleys, for instance. They described the full report as a kind of cold shower for the anti-immigration narrative. And what's important to grasp is their argument. They said essentially that lower tax payments don't automatically equal a cost. Using social services, healthcare, schools, that's a normal, expected part of a balanced welfare model. It's not simply draining the economy. It's part of the social contract. That give and take that makes a welfare society function for everyone.
That's such a crucial point, the social contract idea. Okay, so let's try and bring all this together as we wrap up this part of the deep dive. What's the ultimate takeaway for listeners trying to make sense of this complex picture? How should we understand this data, maybe even beyond just Sweden?
I think the core takeaway, really, is that immigration isn't this monolithic thing you can just label good or bad for the economy. It's not that simple. Its economic impact depends entirely on who the immigrants are. Are they labor, migrants, students, refugees? How long they've been in the country? That's key. And, crucially, what support they receive to integrate. Things like language training, education, access to the job market. And if you frame this in the bigger picture, the data clearly suggests that these long-term investments, they significantly increase the likelihood that newcomers will become net contributors down the line. So what does this mean for policy? Well, the data reveals something quite stark. Without its foreign-born taxpayers, Sweden's public finances would actually be worse off, according to this NIER report.
It really does urge us, doesn't it, this deep dive into Sweden's data, to move past those simplistic stereotypes, to see immigration as it really is, complex, dynamic, and as this report shows, in many cases, deeply beneficial economically. It's a powerful reminder, I think, to always look beyond the headlines, seek out the full picture, the nuances.
Indeed, and understanding these nuances is just so crucial for having informed discussions, not just shouting matches. And like you said, this isn't just about Sweden. It provides a kind of framework, doesn't it, for thinking about the economic contributions of different populations in any country with diverse demographics.
Absolutely. So a final thought for you, our listeners, to mull over from this deep dive. What stands out to you? Maybe it's that idea that focusing only on short-term costs might completely obscure the long-term benefits. Or perhaps it's the conclusion that investing in integration isn't just a social good, but actually an investment in a stronger economy for everyone. Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive. Stay informed, keep asking questions, and we'll be here to help you unpack the next big topic.